Hi, and welcome to our afternoon subject, Cannabis Banking, Past, Present, and Future. We're here on a bit of a drizzly day in Austin, Texas. Got some guests here in a little bit north of us who are probably laughing at me being buried in snow and ice here in Texas. We have been inundated with questions, we at RiskScout, regarding cannabis banking and really, legalization, policies and procedures. And so what we thought we would do is get a panel of experts together and have a short conversation to share with you guys in the world here. So let's jump in. All right, so I'll be your moderator today. Justin Fisher, I'm the CEO and co-founder of RiskScout. I have about 20 years of fintech experience, mostly working to build solutions for community banks and credit unions across the country. And I founded RiskScout to basically help all institutions deal with higher risk businesses, not just cannabis related, although we'll talk about that today, but also MSBs, private ATMs, and many, many more. So more information on that near the end. And being in my position, I get to see quite a bit of interesting things going on in the cannabis industry. I participate in a lot of referral networking groups and a lot of the general space, as well as the banking and compliance space. And just to set the precedence here with cannabis banking, sometimes we talk to audiences and there's a misunderstanding between CBD and THC. So the cannabis plant as a whole can produce a CBD product, a THC product, like marijuana, we don't generally use that term, or even a fibrous product for clothing, for hempcrete, for different elements that can be used industrially. So when we talk about these products today, we're going to talk about mostly THC, but I just want to highlight the difference that CBD and industrial hemp have very different regulatory space, and they're handled very differently. Still important higher risk businesses, but different than THC. It's also important to think about, I talk to a lot of institutions who come in and say, well, I'm not doing anything cannabis related. And that's totally fine. And that's your prerogative and your risk score. But one of the things to think about is that's kind of like saying, I'm not going to do anybody who sells alcohol. Okay, well, maybe not liquor store, but your local mom and pop sells alcohol, right? And so you really need to think about the differences in what you want to bank in the community. And if you're throwing out everybody, so the baby with the bathwater, then you're really missing out not only on the opportunity, but an opportunity to actually bank people in your community. So, there are different types of businesses, including cultivators, processors, retail, e-commerce. You've got transportation. We've seen really great lighting vendors, industrial supply, even financial, VCs, escrows, lenders. So, not all of these are going to have the same risk profile as a cultivator or a plant touching business. So keep that in mind. You can build a program very explicitly in your compliance program on who you're going to bank, and it can be very profitable and still be a part of banking your community and taking advantage of the opportunity. Another interesting thing is, we're talking today mostly around the banking world, but, lending, which is also part of banking, but there's alternative lenders out there as well, merchant processing, insurance, and escrow, which are all really underserved financial services in this market. So keep that in mind. These are things that really create a really amazing opportunity, and probably one of a kind opportunity until we get to some legalization and commoditization of this product. All right, so 3 big things I want you to hear. Number one, this industry is booming, right? So this last year in 2020, we were in a range between $15 to $18 billion on the THC side. There's still estimates that there's about a $60 billion market total. So that would include the illicit sales. And so as this legalizes in more states, we're going to see this number just really continue to grow, maybe over 40 billion in the next 5 years. One of the interesting things as well is there were some polls done by the Associated Press. And about 10 years ago, we had 0 recreational states. Now we've got 11 in DC, and public opinion 10 years ago was 26% supported legalization. The last public opinion poll done by Pew Research actually shows almost a 70% support of legalization, right? And we saw a lot of that in the November election as well. And we're seeing even states like Virginia just recently, getting further along those approval paths. And finally, I think everyone's starting to realize this, probably why we're getting so much attention from other FIs who've not generally been interested, but we have a political alignment a climate that's now aligned with legalization, right? Some interesting movement here where the previous bills like the SAFE Act and the MORE Act have been shut down in the Senate now can potentially have new life. And so even as late as last week, Schumer and some other lead Democrats are pulling those bills back together, and they're talking about releasing a new cannabis package of legislation in the next few weeks, is what the estimate is. So we could see something very impactful this year. If you ask me, I think we'll see some kind of deschedulization or some decriminalization, maybe not legalization this year, but likely in the next 2 to 3 years. As I use the USDA and industrial hemp as an example. As they can get all the working pieces together and figure out how federal versus state laws are really going to work, I think that's the part that's going to take time. But we are seeing an alignment in the political landscape now. So my first guest is Kristin Parker. I get to work with Kristin on a daily basis. She's our director of compliance, and she comes with over a decade of experience in the BSA chair. She has a lot of really unique experience actually managing a lot of the different high-risk programs that we see. So MSBs, ATMs, cannabis related. She's obviously certified to the gills, and we were really happy to have her at RiskScout. So Kristin, we have a couple of questions for you here. So why is it so hard to get banking services when some of this cannabis related business is legal today?
Well, I would say there's probably several reasons here. I would say it's probably a lot of the risk of it, with hemp specifically. You can plant a legal hemp seed and it could grow into an illegal crop if the THC level is above 0.3. And the burden of learning a new field like this, you don't know what you don't know, and learning this whole industry can be very complex. And when you're in smaller community banks or even larger ones, taking out and carving out the time to do so can be very, very burdensome. And then the other piece might be, maybe your management or your board of directors is very concerned about a reputational risk just based on the nature of the industry.
Yeah, no, that's really great. We definitely see a lot of I don't know what I don't know, and that drives a lot of concern and fear in the space. Unfortunately, some community businesses are impacted by that, even though they are managing a legal product. So tell us kind of a high level layman's terms, like what's the high level difference between regulations and sort of THC, CBD, and hemp?
So, with THC, it's federally illegal, but it is legal in some states. With hemp, it's legal everywhere. It's up to the states. It's legal federally, but it's up to the states, being um, having their laws passed or approved by the USDA. Some states are not even to that point yet. CBD is federally legal if derived from hemp, but there's a lot of gray area there. FDA involvement. It was approved for a drug, not too long ago, so they got their hands on that legality of it, and they just move slow as snails to give us any answers on what we can and can't do with hemp or with CBD. So that's basically it on a high level.
Yeah, no, that's great points. I mean, the thing that's different about CBD is that with edibles and smokable hemp and different elements of sort of ingestion, it sort of puts it on the radar for, the FDA, right? Also interesting, I think, from the compliance side, right, that we have some pretty good, memo-based guidance, but we have some pretty good guidance from a lot of agencies on hemp, but obviously nothing on THC because of the federal challenges. And CBD is a bit lacking. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah, and with federal guidance or guidance from any of our regulatory regimes, we've got even some on hemp that's really not telling you exactly what to do. It's just saying, yeah, you can do it. Here's some high level ideas of how you could do it, but they don't just come out and help you figure out how to build a program and make it scalable and sustainable too, so that because this isn't stopping, this isn't slowing down. And we've got some guidance on marijuana, just saying what you should do, in regards to filing SARS and the Cole memo and all of that. But it's just, we're never going to get that just straightforward. Here how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Until we see really clear regs, it makes it kind of a gray area. What do you think it happens to banking, sort of banking compliance if legalization on the THC product happens?
I think you're going to still have the burden that you have with hemp. I think, you're going to have multiple, it's probably going to roll out like hemp did up to the states. States have been very slow to move. It probably fall in the USDA regime. And, it's just going to be years before we have any type of concrete, telling of what it's going to look like. And not only that, but all these states that have had it legal have got to deal with the cash, the legacy cash that is sitting in, God knows where all over the United States, under people's mattresses, whatever. We've got to figure out how to tackle all of that. And all of that's going to be it's going to be challenging for years and years to come. But at least you've got that, peace of mind that you're not going to be held liable on, that piece from the federal side.
Yeah. Well, it's really great insight. And we know from just the USDA, the Farm Bill was signed in December 2018, and we're still not fully rolled out with industrial hemp. So it's a good point that it could take quite a bit of time, but it is an underserved community, and it'll be nice to see when banks can, come off the sidelines and feel more comfortable banking it. Thank you, Kristin. All right, my next guest is Melissa Marsal. We get to work with Melissa as well. She is leads the bank in everything hemp. She has a hemp trademark out there, Hemp Banks Here. I actually reference this quite a lot to hemp businesses I talk about. She's very public about supporting the community and the farming base. And Westtown is essentially in an all-in approach, providing all the services necessary for hemp businesses to do their business. Welcome, Melissa. How are you today?
I'm great, Justin. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Good. So hemp and CBD is still risky, even though it's legal. Why do you choose to bank these businesses?
Well, we get the value add. I mean, this is a legitimate business, and I think we've said it 100 times just in the opening remarks. And Kristin, it's legal. So I think a lot of banks are struggling to how to figure out how to compete in the market today. Community banks are all fighting for the same market share. So we are a pretty big niche bank, and that's why we specifically target underserved markets, one of which being hemp and CBD. And for us, it really was and is a wonderful deposit gathering arena, and it opens up doors for other opportunities in the space. And we were able to mitigate the risk. We know them, we recognized them, and we put in a pretty robust compliance program, leveraging RiskScout as well. And by that, we're able to, again, effectively mitigate any known or perceived risk, and again, have a pretty big market share and a pretty big industry, I think, that we're real proud to serve.
Yeah, no, that's great. So let me ask you, how would legalization impact your institution?
So if it's passed, we're ready in our bank, to be very honest, to overall bank cannabis. We've got our programs written for both hemp and the above 0.3% THC. So we're ready for it. It'll again be like it was with hemp. We'll be very cautious and careful, making sure our board is with us like they are now with hemp, and just again making certain that whatever risk we know or are aware of will be in good shape. Now, what a lot of us as community banks are hanging our hats on is the passage of the Safe Banking Act. That to us would give us the needed protection that we can bank these and not have the risk, or again, perceived risk, I keep saying, of getting in trouble, if you will, with the regulators. They haven't touched people that are, and I don't think they will. But again, this just gives us an extra layer of assurance. And again, it'll help us go to market quicker with that program. I think it will loosen some of the things with hemp, just because I think the focus will then be more over the overreaching cannabis space.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So Melissa, we see upwards of 20 businesses a day who contact us through our other website asking for banks and credit unions and banking services, financial services. Most of them are being kicked out, or their funds are frozen with Square, so forth. It's challenging for these businesses, and then they find you. What's one thing you would like them to know if you could talk to them directly now?
So I always tell everybody that calls us, that, and we do hear those horror stories, got two today from some larger banks, obviously, that exit the space, but we tell them, just because they didn't know they were banking you. And so the don't ask, don't tell approach, we can't do that. So I always tell everybody, we're going to ask you a lot of questions because our process and the way we're regulated says we need to know our customer. So we're going to ask a lot of questions, but I always take the opportunity to say, and I mean it, that we're getting to know your business so we can help you. We may have something available to you that you may not even know. And if I don't know what you're doing in your industry and your business, I will not be able to give you that same sort of support. So we always just tell everybody, we're not going to bank you just because you're a hemp company, but we're not going to not bank you because you're a hemp company. So we just need to make sure everybody understands, just like their industry is regulated, we're highly regulated. So as long as it's classified as high risk, we just have to monitor and manage it differently. But it certainly doesn't mean we don't love the industry and we don't support the industry, and that these are just things we have to do to stay in compliance.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, and thank you for what you're doing for the community. I've seen this firsthand, true to form. They care about the relationship with the business in their community. They want to know what you're doing. I know as a business, I hear this all the time, that you don't feel comfortable sharing all of these things because you've been rejected for those things. It's really important to find a bank who is like Melissa or Mel that we're talking to next, that is actively talking about what you're doing, is actively interested in what you're doing. And thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Okay, so Mel is my next guest, and Mel has 26 years of banking. She joined Oklahoma State Bank in 2014, and really they have been a pioneer of cannabis banking in the Oklahoma area with over 200 cannabis businesses. I regularly have these conversations with Mel about all these community businesses, and size doesn't matter. I'm looking at the business itself and trying to understand, what they're doing and bring them in and help my community. And she truly does walk that walk, just like Melissa. I think it'd be really interesting to talk to you, Mel, about your THC program. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So you're banking cannabis THC. Again, I don't use the marijuana word. A lot of banks know marijuana related businesses. By the way, I don't use that word because it's somewhat derogatory and kind of tied into the war on drugs, but we use cannabis THC mostly when we talk about it. But what are the challenges you face by banking cannabis THC businesses?
Well, the biggest challenges in this type of industry, any high risk industry, is your compliance. There is so much compliance. Melissa alluded to being a highly regulated industry. And so we're really joining two highly regulated industries here, the cannabis industry and the banking industry. So compliance, by and large, is the biggest challenge. Another huge challenge we have in cannabis is the amount of cash, because it's strictly a cash business. You can't go in and use your debit card and make a purchase in a dispensary. Because it is so underbanked, we have wholesalers who are selling products to a retail outlet, and all of those transactions are in cash also. So cash is hard to deal with. Cash creates security risks. And so those are the two biggest challenges, is making sure we're in compliance, making sure our customers are in compliance, and then handling the cash.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And just a side note, we worked with a few institutions and some private ATM owners, and there's this really interesting additional layer of problems when that ATM is being heavily won't say manipulated, but heavily operated by the actual business owner. So it's even harder to track that cash, as if you're not in the ATM side of banking, that's another thing to think about. But those ATMs are very heavily used, and if they're sponsored by that dispensary, you have some added issues to deal with.
You sure do.
So Mel, how does legalization? I mean, you're doing it now, THC banking, but how does legalization impact your bank?
Well, I would say with legalization, we will see a lot more banks come into the space. And so, if you do a SWOT analysis, looking down the road at legalization, certainly one of your threats would be competition. At this time, there are so few banks in the United States that do have a cannabis program. in Oklahoma, for example, we know who the Oklahoma banks are, but with legalization, we would anticipate that a lot more banks would come into the industry. And that is good and that is bad. So really the biggest thing we look at right now is how we can try to anticipate what's going to happen on down the road with legislation and be ready to pivot around that. Something that would help us with legalizing would be if we could get Visa and MasterCard in this industry. That would take out so much of the cash. We now can give a cannabis customer access to the electronic payment system and that kind of thing, but debit and credit cards are not accepted in this industry right now. So getting the cash out would be a huge bonus for us with legalization, but then we must also look at the other banks who are going to want to, and rightly so, want to jump in this industry because it is certainly a growing industry.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I was just going to add that I've recently, even just with the hint of legalization, seen that a lot of the going rates for bank fees out there are starting to have to drop, and that additional competition is going to make it impossible to charge. Some banks out there, not present company, but some banks out there are charging $2,500 a month for a bank account, and that's going to be very difficult to charge. But if you've built your program today on compliance that requires that much cost, that much revenue to cover those costs, you got to really think about that. And you're going to have a lot more competition. It's a really good point. So,
Sure.
So I'll ask you the same question I asked Melissa. Businesses are coming to you. They're probably in all different states of organization and different types of businesses. If you could talk to them here and give them one piece of background, what would you want them to know?
Well, I think it's very important that they get their entities set up correctly. Talk to your attorney, talk to a CPA, get them involved in setting up your business structure and your entities so that it is very clear. Things like beneficial ownership, for example. That's a BSA thing that we deal with on all levels, not just in cannabis, but having your documents together and having your licensing and all of this is very important when you're trying to get a bank account, because as Melissa already said, we're going to ask you a lot of questions and we're going to ask you for a lot of documents. And another thing we would like these customers to understand is compliance is very expensive, and it's expensive for the bank. And so we do have to pass that on. But when we have the opportunity to work with partners such as RiskScout, for example, who put together a good package that helps us to really take a look at the big picture of these customers and understand how they are structured, who owns them, and how they operate, that is a huge help to any bank looking to get involved in this industry.
Yeah, that's really great feedback. Yeah, if you are wanting to set up as a business your entities and somehow you're thinking that you want 3 or 4 buried LLCs on your UBO form, don't do that. Your bank's gonna have an issue with that. Don't bury your entities. We have to get to a heartbeat. We have to know who's owning these companies if you're gonna want to get past. Use Mel's advice and really do good structure, be organized, show us that you care about compliance. On the banking side, and it's going to be a lot easier for you. Well, Mel, thank you so much. That's really great feedback. And, we didn't have, a lot of time today to dive very deep. And so we will be doing some follow-ups to this. We'll probably do some spotlights on THC banking, some spotlights on hemp banking, maybe talk a little bit more about lending and insurance and merchant processing, which I know are really hot topics. But in the meantime, we're going to end this video by sharing Westtown Bank's information. You can find them at westtownbank.com. A lot of really great information about their hemp program. Very similarly with Oklahoma State Bank, osbbank.com. You can find Mel and her team and their THC banking initiative. And if you're interested in RiskScout, you can find us at riskscout.com. We also have a private LinkedIn group that's really designed for bank executive operation groups and compliance people to share information about all of these topics, including also MSBs and private ATMs and much more. So we'd love to add you to that. We'll be hosting more webinars. In fact, we have one next week on the intricacies of compliance in cannabis banking. So, look for those links where this video is posted.